When you look across the vast sea of games, other controllers tend to lack Nintendo's distinctiveness. Elsewhere, you see generation after generation of cloney, standardized controllers with incremental changes to the design. But Nintendo marches to the beat of its own bongos. So for today's episode, we're going to take a closer look at how we got from here to here. Starting in 1980, Nintendo began using recycled calculator technology to make Game & Watch portable games. But those old rubber buttons weren't elegant at moving a character in more than two directions. 2 years later, a young engineer named Gunpei Yokoi came up with a plus sign shaped button for the handheld version of Donkey Kong, and the D-pad was born. It freed Mario to move around with ease, up and down the ladders and left and right across the beams. The rest was Nintendo thumb history. The D-pad proved infectious and became the default method of control on the NES. That is, unless you were awesome and played with a power glove. Unlike the Atari joystick, which swiveled in every direction, the NES controller allowed you to move your character perfectly straight. This sounds simple, but without the D-pad, it would be difficult to climb a vine without falling off, or even duck down a warp pipe. You can see the D-pad's fingerprints all over the design of early Nintendo games. For instance, Punch-Out's controls directly corresponded with 4 directions of movement. You could dodge left or right, hold down the block, or press up to throw a face punch. And with directional precision, you could easily wiggle up all those vines in Super Mario Bros. 2 without falling off. Fast forward to the 1990s when the Super Nintendo's controller grew twice as many buttons, but retained the trusty D-pad. New buttons enabled new abilities and new friends. Shigeru Miyamoto had wanted Mario to ride a dinosaur ever since the original Super Mario Bros., but the NES pad lacked enough buttons. 2 buttons were enough to make Mario run and jump, but when riding Yoshi, you needed the ability to dismount. The SNES pad allowed for an eject button, so you could bail at the last second before Yoshi plummeted from this mortal coil into the infinite abyss. Sorry, bud. Likewise, leaning into curves in F-Zero would be impossible without shoulder buttons, nor could we throw eggs at question clouds in Yoshi's Island, and how else are you supposed to do a barrel roll anyway? This was well and good, but then the N64 controller emerged. Games were changing to 3D, and with new perspectives came new controls, namely the analog stick. Although Nintendo hedged their bets by slapping a D-pad on it because, you know, hey, old habits die hard. Also, did they forget we only had 2 hands? Anyway, according to Giles Goddard, a former programmer at Nintendo, the N64 controller and Mario 64 were under development simultaneously. The first thing Miyamoto did before designing the game was experiment with how Mario would be controlled. So the controller fit Mario like a glove. The C buttons allowed the controller to swing freely around him, and the Z trigger was placed under your left index finger, so it could be held in combination with other button presses. This was totally unprecedented and led to all kinds of crazy leaps. Mario could backflip, get a running start for a super long jump, and do the butt pound. This was a big influence on the Ocarina of Time, with the way Link could lock onto a foe by holding down Z and then do jump attacks or dodge to the side. Then 2001 rolled around, and the GameCube controller proved that Stanley Kubrick was off a little bit. It was no backstabbing voice-controlled AI interface, but it did shake things up. By then, every controller had double analog sticks, but importantly, GameCube rethought the arrangement of X, Y, A, and B. The result? It felt custom built for throwing the smackdown in Smash. Your thumb glided with grace from the big fat A button, which signals your main attack, to the springy C stick for a quick smash attack. And Metroid Prime showed the D-pad and analog sticks could actually play nice together, with the D-pad used for scanning with your visor and the C stick for zipping between weapons. When the Wii Remote showed up, it was a huge departure from all convention. Like it arrived on a spaceship, it sported a whole slew of revolutionary stuff. It had an accelerometer for plunking tennis balls with velocity in Wii Sports, a gyroscope for one-to-one control over your sword in Skyward Sword, an infrared pointer for scooping up star bits and spitting them back out in Mario Galaxy, and a nunchuck for hurting yourself while pretending to be a ninja. Also, it had a regular controller if you hated fun. And lastly, we come to the Wii U gamepad. I'll give you, it's pretty much an Xbox controller wrapped around an iPad, but you know what? That's synergy, people. Sure, it's endured a fair share of criticism for games not living up to its potential, but at its best, it encourages creative interplay between 2 screens. With Mario Maker, for instance, you can make your own Mario levels with the stylus on the touchscreen and then play them on TV. Also, it brings a splash of color to the typically gray and brown first-person shooter. In Splatoon, you can go squid form and launch to any area that's painted your team's color by simply tapping on the screen. So as you can see, Nintendo has a rich tradition of bonding their quirky controllers with unique game mechanics that's in a class all by itself. An important takeaway is how these controllers are usually showcased by a specific game, like the D-pad in Donkey Kong, or the N64 controller in Mario 64, or the Wii Remote and Wii Sports. With their next console, the NX, on the horizon, here's hoping their controllers continue to defy expectations, as long as it's not another DK Bongos. So what do you think? Are Nintendo's controllers paragons of excellence, or are they just really out of left field? Hash it out in the comments, and if you like what you saw, please subscribe. I'll see you next week. So, as you can see, I was on vacation. It was wonderful, thanks for asking. But that means we have 2 weeks of comments to catch up to. So let's see what you had to say about Game of Thrones and Street Fighter. Chase Ladner questions the idea of whether or not Game of Thrones is a balanced game. For instance, the warring factions have different tendencies. So the Lannisters don't really care about the morale of their kingdom, or the Starks are honest and won't lie or bribe. But here's the thing, rivals in games aren't required to have equal skill sets in order to be balanced. This is what's called, it's called asymmetrical game design, where different character types have different things that they're good at. And this happens all the time in fighting games and in shooters like Team Fortress 2, where the heavies are slow-moving bullet sponges and the scout is speedy with a tiny little bit of health. Also, it's important to look at balance as being part of a long-term strategy. So in Game of Thrones, this is a universe that's been around for quite some time. There are certain strategies that are very effective for a short period of time, and then eventually they fall to some other new type of thing. So yeah, I think it could totally work. Joshua Swagger puts forth the idea that game design can be applied to the history and development of nations as well as to fictional kingdoms. So he makes this case that good level design is the reason why Europe became a superpower. It wasn't protected by natural boundaries, but it wasn't totally cut off from outside attacks either, so they had to develop military resources. This is a really, really valid point, as games like Warhammer actually descended from tactical military exercises. So it could be that nation building and game design go hand in hand. I mean, that's the reason why chess was developed and played by generals everywhere. Several viewers, including Super Krista 123, bring up the Game of Thrones mod for Crusader Kings 2, which is this really amazing simulation game that gives rise to these crazy emergent narrative events. Seriously, totally crazy. You should check out the Reddit thread on it. Anyway, in the episode, we talk about how a good narrative naturally flows into good game design, but Crusader Kings 2 actually flips the script, showing how a game with good strategy, can actually present a compelling story. It's definitely something you should check out if you're interested in that sort of thing. Moving on, the Street Fighter. Alpha Luna disputes that zoning and spacing are the same thing. Many players use the terms interchangeably. Others say that spacing is the offensive use of space and zoning is defensive. We couldn't actually find a good definition for spacing in the SRK glossary, but it defines zoning as keeping your opponent out of the space they want to be in. So yeah, there's a little bit of ambiguity there, as with all important things. Satoshi Nakamoto brings up the wonderful fighting game Dive Kick, where hilariously the only move that you have is the dive kick, if you couldn't tell already. Because of that, many people think of it as a joke game because the game is so simple, but there's not a lot of special moves or anything like that. But in other regards, it becomes this like beautiful examination of spacing mechanics. It takes this very specific thing about fighting games and turns it into a game in and of itself. RPG Grenade makes an interesting connection between the use of space in a game like Street Fighter and martial arts. As I talked about in the episode, Street Fighter takes place in 2D space with space divided between height and width on the X and Y axes. But in a real fight, the role of aerial attacks are greatly diminished, since people don't have the crazy jumping abilities of Street Fighter characters, or frankly, the ability to shoot fireballs from their hands, as far as I know anyway. But martial artists have another dimension to account for, which is that fighters can move from the left to the right. They can move back and forth in front of each other along the Z axis, which is a mechanic that we actually don't really see in fighting games, but maybe it'll be something for virtual reality.